All right, so now that we have a working knowledge of conditionals and we have a pretty solid foundation of how conditionals and Boolean statements work together, we're going to fix our Moodlight program. So we learned previously in lesson 4 that our program was essentially every color was incrementing from 0 to 255, and then because they were byte values, were abruptly changing back to 0 once they tried to change to 256 because it only looked at those first 8 bits. So now we're actually going to alter our program in a way so that we can, in fact, change it so it goes all the way up and then goes all the way down and then goes all the way up and then goes all the way down. So essentially what our program is going to do, and we're going to use conditionals to do this, is we're going to count up from 0 to 255, and then we're going to count back down until we hit to 0. So it's going to flow to 0 to 255, back to 0 in a nice flowy motion. So we're going to improve our Moodlight, and there are a couple different ways you can do this. What I like to do is I like to create a Boolean value, so something that can track whether my counter should be counting up or my counter should be counting down. So I like to track and create this value. This Boolean right here is going to be set to true when our counter for red intensity should be going up, and it's going to be set to false when our counter should be going down. So we have to think about this a little bit. If we start at 0, we want it counting up. So we will have red count up set to true. It will count all the way up to 255. And when we reach 255, we want this to start counting down. So we'll set it to false. And then when it's counting down, when it reaches 0, it will reset to true. So we're going to use our knowledge of conditionals to do this. And then hopefully this will repeat back and forth with red, and it will increment up and increment down. So if you go into Visual Studio, you should have that Unit 3, Lesson 3 Moodlight program pulled up. We commented in this last time, so we know that this program creates that background color for us. If you go down to the update section, currently red, green, and blue just increment as the program runs, and that's fine for the previous program we were making, but now we're going to alter it a little bit so that we can make it look a little nicer. It'll count up sometimes and down sometimes to give it a nice flowy motion. So what I'd like you to start off doing is comment out the green for now, because we're going to change this program a little bit, and we're actually going to delete this line of code right here because we don't want red to increment every 60th of a second. We're going to have it increment in a different way. So comment out the green and blue for now, delete out that red code. We're going to replace it in just a minute. So remember, I talked about adding in a new variable, and this is going to be a Boolean variable called red count up. And I'm going to start it off equal to true because I want it to count up to start. And this value is tracking whether red should increase or decrease. That is the purpose of this variable. So I want to make sure I am tracking whether I'm counting up or down, and I'm starting off counting up. So if I go down into my code, now this is going to look a little bit different. I want to say if red count up is equal to true. If that Boolean value is equal to true, then I want red plus plus to increase. So I want to make sure I add my comments in here. If red should be counting up, so if red should count up, red should, you can write increase. If red should be increasing, that's when red count up is equal to true. And then from here, this will increase red intensity of our background 60 times per second. This is the first piece. We want to increase red 60 times per second, but we also want red to decrease if red count up is false. I'm going to copy and paste the same piece of code here, but now I'm going to purposefully change it. This I need if red is equal to false, and this is when red should decrease. I then can use the little shortcut with minus minus to decrease red intensity 60 times a second. So notice how I've altered my code, and I'm using conditionals to do that. If red count up is true, I'm going to increase my red intensity 60 times per second. If red count up is false, I'm going to decrease my red intensity 60 times per second. So now I'm going to press start, watch what happens, and it's increasing, it's increasing, it's increasing. Still making that same mistake. And I sit here and I'm like, well, I accounted for that. I have red count up is true, red count up is false. But what I forgot to do here is I forgot to tell it when to switch from true to false. So yes, I included this code in here, but I also need to tell red count up when it should be true and when it should be false. So here, this is where I have my next conditional. If you think about it, if you remember from here, when red reaches 255, red count up should switch to false. And when red reaches 0, red count up should switch to true. So you need to add in another line of code. If red equals 255, so remember equals is checking for equality if both sides of the double equal sign are true or the same, excuse me. If red equals 255, then red count up needs to change to false. So if we reach that very, very top value, red count up needs to switch to false because that's when we need to start counting down. And then if red equals 0, then red count up needs to switch to true. So we're going to comment in a little bit different of a way. You can also comment before each conditional, and you can say when red reaches maximum value, starts counting down. And then here before this conditional, when red reaches minimum value, starts counting up. So I can see here when I'm reaching that maximum value, I want to start counting down. So I switch it to false. And when I want to start counting up again is when I reach that minimum value. And now if I press start again, I increase red up. And when I hit that maximum value, instead of abruptly changing, I go back down. And now you see a nice flowy motion between red and black. So what I'd like you to do is now on your own, I want you to add in the code that will increment the green and will increment the blue. So essentially at the end of this program, what you should see is that it increases nicely from black to white, black to white. And then if you'd like to play around with it a little bit, you can change the starting values for green and blue if you'd like. So that's your task here. Now that you've seen the red in motion, can you alter the green and the blue? So they'll count up in a nice way as well. And make sure that as you code, you're including these nice comments. Get in that habit because you'll need to do it as you get to your project at the end of this unit.